I'm Barry Honig. I'm a professor of computational biology and biophysics at Columbia University. I'm also a member of the board of the American Academy of Science and Letters, a newly formed learned society devoted to excellence in intellectual achievement. In the context of that society, I was privileged last year to be part of the award given to Steven Koonin. The award is called the Barry Prize, and we're going to be giving these prizes each year for excellence in intellectual activity. So let me say a few words about Steve Koonin, who I'll be interviewing, but really having a discussion with today. Steve has a remarkable set of achievements that are really, I'd say, even extraordinary. He's a theoretical physicist, got his PhD in physics from MIT, was a professor at Caltech, and in the context of his academic activities and research in theoretical physics, was elected to the US National Academy of Sciences. But beyond that, his activities in the public sector have been perhaps even more remarkable. He's was provost of Caltech, moved to British Petroleum, where he was the chief scientist and moved that company towards sort of renewable energy. He was Undersecretary of Science in the Department of Energy under the Obama administration, and is a member of JASON, a group of scientists who advise the US government on technical matters. Following all that, Steve became interested in climate science, has gained some notoriety in climate science. And his book, let me get it right, Unsettled, What Climate Science Tells Us, What It Doesn't, and Why It Matters, was published in 1921 and has certainly offered many of us an opportunity to understand the issues underlying climate science in ways that certainly one doesn't get from the popular press or even other sources. So let's start with that. Steve, what have your activities in this general area, which range from this underlying science to communication to public policy, what has it told you about the state of science today, intellectual integrity underlying science, and underlying the public face of science?
Yeah, so if I speak specifically about climate science and energy technologies, I always thought that the proper role of the technical folks, the scientists and engineers, was to inform decision makers, whether they're in the private sector or the government, about the options, the trade-offs, one with the other, and so on. And unfortunately, in these areas, many of the scientists have evolved to persuading or attempting to persuade rather than to inform. That makes it particularly problematic because the media love climate scare stories. Industry loves to jump on the energy transition as a way of making profit. So all of these conspire together, but at the root, it's that scientists have morphed from informing to persuading.
And do you think that's a particular feature of climate science, or is it something that's sort of spread to other areas or even started in other areas? Has there always been some of this in academia?
Oh, of course, there always has been, but never to the extent that we've seen it now. It embraces scientific institutions. It embraces the leadership of the technical leadership of corporations. You just can't say anything that is counter to the narrative that we must rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, there are countervailing considerations, but many people who know better dare not say it because they'll get canceled.
And obviously there's the issue of cancel culture, again, goes beyond it, but it's climate science, but it's particularly focused in climate science. And but what does it say about, academia? Do you think, has academia changed in the last 20, 30 years, say, as a result of this and perhaps other factors?
Yeah.
And
what
can be done about it?
In the softer subjects, philosophy, cultural studies and so on, there's been a loss of objectivity, and to my mind, and a absence of vigorous debate, diverse points of view, if you like, a different form of diversity. And it is an objective fact. You can just see it in the hires that are done, in the courses that are taught. I really think that we're starting to see the pendulum swing back in a more sensible direction. Many universities are looking for now people who can bring a diversity of perspectives to the campus rather than just fall in line with the narrative.
But there's, I also have a sense it's swinging back, but there's a lot still happening in the other direction. There was an editorial in the Wall Street Journal today about the National Institutes of Health and DEI initiatives. And basically, for certain types of grants to universities, but also almost in every individual grant, you have to make the equivalent of a statement of devotion to DEI principles. It's quite shocking, and I'm not sure how the tide turns. Do you think it can come internally within universities from government action, etc.?
So a lot of this has got to do with government regulation, at least at the NIH example, which you cited. And government regulations change with administrations. They change with the composition of Congress. And I think that one is probably relatively easy to swing around. I think in the softer subjects, the diversity you talked about, cultural studies, it's going to be harder. But in the technical subjects, and again, I come back to energy and climate, there are underlying techno-economic realities that you can't evade, no matter what policies you would like. They've got to respect those realities. And we're already seeing in Europe, particularly, policy actions that are getting effectively shouted down by business, by the populace, because they're just much too severe, much too extreme. And so I think in the end, as Feynman would have said, reality will prevail, and we'll get it right. The question is how much damage will be done to societies in terms of energy reliability, energy affordability, geopolitical standing before the tide really reverses.
So let me ask you an unusual question. If you were climate czar, what would you, how would you like us to respond to the possibility that we are affecting the climate in a serious way, and where should we be moving in the future, and how should we be moving there?
Yeah, so the first thing to do is to cancel the climate crisis. Acknowledge that there's a problem, but that, by all indications, we have a century or more to get it right. And so net zero by 2050, which is a common mantra, is just ridiculous. It's both unnecessary and unachievable. The second thing I would like to do is to see a more honest representation of the science. And that involves, for example, adversarial reviews of the assessment reports and so on. The third is that there are low-hanging fruits that we can and should pick up to help reduce emissions now. Flaring of natural gas, for example, leaky natural gas, pipelines, distribution systems, particularly vehicle efficiency. These are all things that are easily within reach and can be gently nudged. I think another very important part of the problem is to acknowledge that there are 6.5 billion people on the planet who do not have adequate energy, some of them in terrible energy poverty. And we, the world, has a moral obligation to ensure that they have reliable and affordable energy. And the best way to do that right now is to provide them with fossil fuel capabilities, coal, natural gas, and oil. And so we should not be stopping that. We should be, in fact, encouraging it, because we're improving the human condition that way. And then finally, I'm giving you a long list.
No, good.
R&D. in emissions light technologies, um, small nuclear reactors, batteries, carbon capture. These are all things that are not technically or economically mature, but they could be with more concerted effort on the part of the government and private sector. But I would stop short of forced or encouraged deployment that's going to be very expensive and very disruptive. We need to realize we've got time to deal with this. The energy system is one of the most crucial for society, and we best change it by orthodontia rather than tooth extraction.
And finally, we're both academics, and at least for me, and I assume for you, it means a great affection for the academic enterprise, what's it's achieved in the last 50 or much longer years. And you know, I certainly find what I see around me very depressing. I assume you do as well. Do you see any hope of internal correction? You said earlier that it swings back. That is, how might this happen? How might we be saved from ourselves? Can we save ourselves from ourselves?
Yeah, and again, I think it depends on which parts of the university you're looking at. I find, so I've been teaching master's level students, both climate and energy at NYU, MBAs at Engineers Mixed, which is interesting in its own right. And you might argue that this is the more factually receptive cohort among the students. But I find that when I go through those subjects, the eyes get opened up because I just teach facts right out of the official documents. And so I think there is among, again, some fraction of the students a willingness to be educated about facts and critical thinking. I think the faculty are going to be much harder, but you know, I'm trying to do my bit by writing books and being out doing presentations to again just talk about the facts, because energy and climate are such complicated and nuanced subjects that you really need some guidance framework to think your way through it.
Right, I certainly agree. Are there any final comments you'd like to make as we sort of end this interview?
Well, you know, I think the Academy is doing a great service by trying to recognize, honor, promote a factually driven approach with integrity to many of these subjects. It's not the only effort, but I see it as perhaps freeing up other people, other organizations to diverge a bit more and more from the narrative, if you like, not only in climate and energy, but in broader social matters.
Well, we at the Academy appreciate that you've gotten involved with us. We're really delighted, Steve, and we look forward to working with you in the near and more distant future. So thank you, and have a good day.
Good. Thank you.